Judge Stephen Alm, who had been the U.S. Attorney in Hawaii, got to be a state court judge, found, after he got to be a judge, that probation officers were coming to him with motions to revoke probation. Right? People had been put on probation for some felony they'd committed, were missing drug tests, or either missing them or showing up and testing dirty, even though the drug test happened at a probation appointment that was scheduled a month in advance. All these people had to do was not use methamphetamine, which is the main drug in Hawaii, for 3 days before their probation meeting, and they could get away with it, but they didn't. 20% of the appointments, people showed up and were dirty. Another 10% they missed, right, per appointment. So when somebody had accumulated 7 or 8 or 9 violations, the probation officer would finally bring the case to the judge, say, look, this guy's not getting the message, send him to prison. And Judge Alm said, okay, I see that. I see this guy isn't getting the message. But if this is his 9th violation, what happened the first 8 times? Why are you only bringing me this case when it's hopeless? And the probation officer said, Judge, we've got caseloads of 180. Right? 30% of 180 is 54. That means every one of us would have to write up 54 revocation motions a month. There aren't that many hours in a day, and if we wrote them up, you couldn't hold all those hearings. So we jawbone the ones we can, and the ones that are hopeless we bring to you. And Judge Alm said, you wouldn't raise your kid that way. You wouldn't train a puppy that way. I want to hear about the first violation. And the probation officer said, Your Honor, is there some part of impossible that you'd like us to explain more slowly? We can't do that. So Steve, who's a much more reasonable guy than the average judge, said, okay, I hear you. We'll compromise. Make a list of the people who have fouled up so often that the next time you'd bring them to me for a revocation. That was 35 people. Called all of those 35 scofflaw probationers at an average of 14 prior arrests into his courtroom together for a new process he invented on the spot called a warning hearing. And at the warning hearing, he basically read them the riot act. Said, look, you're not doing your part. We want you to succeed on probation, but you're not keeping your half of the deal. Right? The probation deal is, we didn't send you to prison, you obey some rules, but you're not obeying those rules. So, from now on, you're going to call this phone number every morning, and I'm going to give you a color code, and if your color code comes up, you've got till 2 o'clock to show up for a drug test. And if you don't show up, we'll go chase you. And if you're dirty, you're going to jail. That night, right away. I'll have a hearing, but while you're waiting for the hearing, you're going to be waiting in a jail cell. And then he did some other good stuff. He sort of addressed them as adults and pointed out that they ought to take responsibility for their own lives, and not sure what the effective part of this was. What I am sure of is that of these 35 people who had a violation rate of 30% and who were now being tested at least 6 times a month, of those 35 people, fewer than half ever faced an actual sanction. For the rest, the threat, which was a very convincing threat, and he'd done the work of organizing the whole criminal justice system to deliver on it. He had the cops and the probation department and his staff and the jail and the drug treatment programs all ready to work together. But the threat, given that it was a real threat, turned out to be enough. So he managed to make the threat do the work of the actual punishment. And there's a long story about this. There are now 1,500 people in this program. And being on the program reduces your chances of going to prison by 2/3. Reduces your chances of being arrested for a new crime by more than half. Costs about $1,400. Most of that goes for the drug treatment for people who fail 2 or 3 or 4 times. At that point, the judge says to them, think you need some help? You say you're not addicted, you say you could quit, but you're not quitting. So now you got a choice between a residential program and a prison cell. But that's about 8%. Because not only do fewer than half ever face a sanction, fewer than half of the people who get a first sanction ever get a second. And fewer than half of those ever get a third, and now you're down to a level where you can treat, as opposed to Prop 36 in California, where we have to assess and treat everybody, and therefore everybody gets crappy treatment. Right? Somebody who needs treatment under the Hawaii program, which is called HOPE, gets good treatment. Costs about $1,400 per probationer per year. That's about, on top of routine probation, so that's about 2.5 times the cost of routine probation. It saves, in reduced incarceration, about $7,000 a year. So it more than pays for itself, even if you ignore the fact that you prevented crime, shrunk the drug market, and saved these people's lives. They're now no longer doing life in prison on the installment plan. These are people with an average of 14 prior arrests. So the dogma that says that drug users can't stop without treatment is just wrong. Sure they can. Or this is a remarkable form of drug treatment.